They said fine, but it wasn't fine. You can tell by the way they said it, the email they copied 3 people on for no apparent reason, the just checking in that was actually a pointed reminder. Maybe it was the compliment that somehow left you feeling worse than an insult would have. Well, passive aggressive behavior at work is really one of the most maddening dynamics to deal with because it's designed to be deniable. There's nothing you can usually point to directly, and yet the message is loud and clear. Today, I'm going to tell you what's actually driving this behavior, why it gets under your skin the way it really does, and exactly how to respond without getting pulled into their game. So stay tuned. Welcome back to Workplace Therapy with me, Dr. Abby Metcalf. So what is passive aggressive behavior at work? Exactly. Now, I did an entire episode on the Relationships Made Easy podcast about dealing with passive aggressive people in your life. So as with everything, I will link to that in on the blog, on the website, and below the video here on if you're watching me on YouTube. But this is going to get very specific at work. So passive aggressive behavior, let me just say that first, is the indirect expression of negative feelings. I actually think that's the best I've ever said that. So it's this indirect expression of some kind of negative feeling, hostility, resistance. So instead of them saying, hey, I'm angry, or I disagree, or I don't want to do this, the passive aggressive person expresses those feelings through their behavior. Okay, that's how you see it. The deliberate shutdown, my favorite, the backhanded compliment, the pointed silence, maybe some sarcasm, sure, no problem, that kind of thing. The task that gets done wrong just often enough that you stop assigning it to them. That's one of my favorites, the little weaponized incompetence kind of thing. So we psychologists really define it as a pattern. It's a pattern of indirectly expressing aggression while maintaining a surface sort of appearance of compliance or pleasantness. So to me, the key word is indirect. That indirectness is what makes it so hard to address, because the moment you try to name it, the other person can genuinely say, well, I didn't say anything wrong. And technically they'd be right, correct? So that's where it gets weird. I'm going to help you. Don't worry. I got a little process today. And what makes it kind of distinct from just being difficult or having a bad attitude is really the consistency and the plausible deniability. Plausible deniability is the cornerstone of passive-aggressive behavior. A passive-aggressive coworker isn't just having a bad day. They've developed this sort of reliable strategy for expressing their displeasure or exerting control without having to own any of it openly. That's why it works. Okay. So how do you know it's actually passive aggressive, right? That's the question I usually get asked. Because a lot of times I'll be working with a client and I'll say, oh, they were really passive aggressive, about something they're telling me in an interaction. And they'll like, oh, was that what that was? I'm like, yeah, that's why you felt so icky about it. Passive aggressive behavior, it's designed to be deniable, right? Like I said, so it can leave you questioning your own read of the situation. So to me, there's a few signs to tell you that your gut is correct on this. And the number one sign is the mixed message feeling. If someone is saying one thing, but you feel something completely different, you should pay attention to that gap. Your nervous system is picking up a signal that your conscious mind hasn't caught up to yet. So you should trust it. So that's number one. Number one, anytime you feel the wobble, between what's being said or the tone or whatever, and you feel a little icky about it, listen to yourself, trust your gut. Number two is that the feedback never feels loving, it never feels healthy or kind. So if you're consistently on the receiving end of, input that feels dismissive or cutting or just like slightly off in a way you can't quite articulate, that's not your imagination. So that's generally passive aggressive behavior. The third thing I see is their denial of obvious feelings. That to me it's a big tell, right? Is when someone is clearly upset but flatly denies any anger or frustration or irritation, because everybody gets angry. I get angry, you get angry. It's a healthy, fine emotion. If someone claims they never get angry, they never do, something's being obviously routed underground. That's not real. Number 4 is that the issue never actually resolves. That's the other way you can tell, because passive aggressive people, they rarely say what they actually need. They'll agree to something and then keep poking at it afterwards, right? So it makes you crazy. They say it's fine. I totally get it. And then their behavior tells you otherwise. The resentment doesn't go away because it was never actually addressed. And number 5 is that they have like a pattern of avoidance. The 5th thing I would say is this pattern of avoidance. Passive aggressive behavior is fundamentally about avoiding direct emotional experience. If a coworker consistently disappears when things get tense, or they bury themselves in distractions the moment conflict, is in the room, that avoidance is part of the same pattern. It really is. I was going to move on, but I just thought of another one. Another sign is what we call masking behaviors. Consistent sarcasm, chronic lateness on specific things, selective forgetting, martyrdom, withholding praise or acknowledgement. I want to throw that in too. Sorry, I thought I was going to have 5. I think I said 5, but I had 6. I think I had 6. Okay. So any one of these in isolation, of course, could mean nothing, right? That, any one of these I've done, I'm sure you've done them, I've done them. But as a pattern, they add up to something. And that's what we pay attention to. So why do people behave passive aggressively at work? I'm sure is your next question, right? Understanding the why, I want to say this first, doesn't mean I'm excusing the behavior in any way, but it does tell you something I think useful about what you're actually dealing with and why a certain kind of direct confrontation usually makes it worse. There's another way to be direct. I'm going to talk about in my steps, but not this like confronting, you're passive aggressive, that kind of stuff. Passive aggressive behavior almost always develops in environments where direct expression of anything that was deemed a negative feeling. And by the way, there's no negative feelings, right? They're all just feelings. But, if you, in your family or environment growing up, there were certain things deemed as negative, like anger or, any kind of pushback, then if it felt unsafe or was actively punished, that can happen a lot. If someone grew up in a family, right, where anger wasn't allowed, where conflict meant rejection or retaliation, where we're saying what you actually thought had real consequences, then they learn to route those feelings, like I said, kind of underground. The feelings don't disappear, of course. They just kind of come out sideways. I always talk about it like air in a balloon, right? If you, put air in a balloon and knot it at the end, you can squeeze, but the air, kind of pushes out into other areas of the balloon. That's what's happening here. And so at work, this pattern gets reinforced by cultures that reward agreeableness and punish dissent. If saying I disagree or I can't take this on has historically resulted in being labeled difficult or got you sidelined, then people are going to learn really quickly to stop saying those things directly. So passive aggressive behavior becomes the only available release valve for those people. Okay. And there's also, I want to say this too, there's also a control dimension that I think is worth understanding. So for someone who feels powerless in a workplace, passive aggressive behavior can be one of the few ways they feel they can exert any influence, right? The deliberate slowdown, the selective incompetence, the strategic forgetting, those are power moves. Even if they look like helplessness on the surface, those are power moves, right? I always think of the person, when I'm driving my car, maybe I stop at a stop sign and someone's walking in the walkway and they're clearly purposefully walking very slow. Maybe some teenage kid who's just I mean, taking their time. I've had people stop in the middle and like look at their phone or something, that's so passive aggressive. That is someone who feels very powerless. I always feel sorry for them. I'm not saying they don't irritate me sometimes, but most of the time I see it for what it is. When I'm walking across the road, I scamper. I'm a scamperer. I don't want to hold anybody up. I got things to do. I'm busy. I feel good in my life. I don't need or want traffic stopping for me. Okay. Oh, I mean, stop please so I can cross the road, but you know what I mean. But if you see someone who's deliberately walking slowly, and you can tell like some teenager, that's because they don't feel power somewhere else. So it's passive aggressive. They're taking it out here in this, you can't really fault them. They're just walking. You're not supposed to run or scamper necessarily, but there's a feel to it, right? Okay. So and I don't know that people, I've always want to remind you sometimes during this workplace therapy, my PhD is in organizational psychology, right? So that's what my PhD is in. And I've worked in and around organizations for 30 years. I've been doing therapy and that kind of thing for about 40. Because I have a master's in counseling psychology, right? I started in a different place. Although my bachelor's, if anyone cares, is in political science. How do you like that? I was going to be a lawyer. So just goes to show you can move things around. But, I've been working inside organizations for a long time and I've seen this dynamic, I have to tell you, at every level, from entry-level employees to senior leadership. It's the saddest thing when senior leadership does it, but if you're listening, you're like, oh yeah, I got a boss who does that, or a manager or a CEO or whoever. The more hierarchical and emotionally repressive the culture, the worse it is, okay? The more passive aggressive behavior tends to flourish in those kind of places. It's really a symptom as much as it's might be someone's like personality trait. So, okay. So why does passive aggressive behavior get under your skin so much? I deal with this a lot. This is probably the piece that most people, they don't necessarily ask me that question, but it's what's happening. And it's because your nervous system is picking up something real that you can't quite name. And that gap between the signal and the language is genuinely destabilizing. When someone communicates hostility directly, your brain knows exactly what it's dealing with. Threat identified, response activated, resolution possible, right? But when the communication is indirect, your nervous system registers the signal, right? It registers it. Something's wrong here. But your prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of your brain, can't find the evidence really to confirm it. And that ambiguity is neurologically distressing. And you can imagine really how much it is in a kid if you grow up in a house like this. Your threat detection system is firing, but you can't locate the threat precisely enough to respond to it. So you end up in this low-grade state of alertness that's exhausting and confusing in equal measure. And I might have, again, just been describing your childhood. And then you end up in a workplace environment where it's pervasive and it's super duper triggering, right? And there, there's also the self-doubt piece. Passive aggressive behavior, it's specifically designed to make you question your own perception. So when someone says fine in a tone that clearly means the opposite, and then insists they meant fine, of course you start wondering if you're reading too much into it. Of course you're wondering if you're crazy. That self-doubt, it's part of the dynamic. And it's one of the more really corrosive effects of sustained exposure to this pattern. Okay. And I talked about season 1, episode 2, I had of the workplace therapy. I had a episode on micro gaslighting and passive aggressive behavior and how they often share that quality of making you distrust your own read of a situation. So, I know it's like feeling gaslit. So before I get into what works, I want to talk about what doesn't work when you're dealing with a passive aggressive coworker. Okay. I think it's really important to differentiate the two because most people's instincts here, I find, are counterproductive. So what doesn't work is matching the energy. Don't match their energy. Don't be passive aggressive too. I see you. I see you. Stop that. Responding, what doesn't work is responding to a pointed, one of their like, just checking in, with your own sort of pointed response, with your own little crappy response. It's not effective. Okay. Going silent yourself or getting subtly sarcastic back, it tends to escalate the dynamic. Again, not fix it. Confronting it aggressively doesn't work, storming in saying, you're being passive aggressive and I won't tolerate it. It really gives the other person exactly the reaction they were engineering for, and almost always ends up with them playing the victim while you look like the problem. I know, I see you. And hoping it'll resolve itself doesn't work. You don't go there either. Ignoring it doesn't work. All of these bring you down to a level that'll eventually reflect badly on you rather than them or with them, which is not what you want. Passive aggressive patterns are remarkably stable without intervention because they're not causing the other person using them any significant pain. So of course they keep doing it. They're causing you pain, which means the incentive to change sits entirely on your side unless something shifts the dynamic. What do I say a lot? Whoever's in the person in the most pain needs to change first. And that is you, my love. That is you. So how do you actually handle a passive aggressive coworker? Let's do it. The approach I like to use has kind of 3 parts to it. So part 1 is asking questions. Asking questions instead of making statements, right? And this is the most important shift you can make. Ask yourself, right? What do I always say? Do you want to be correct or do you want to be effective? Correct is telling them what they are. You're being passive aggressive, blah, blah, blah. Effective is asking them questions so they can have their own moment of clarity and maybe change their behavior. And I'm not saying you're going to ask the question, they're going to go, oh my gosh, I'm being passive aggressive. How horrible. That's not how it works. But when they're not getting the reactions they want, trust me, no one is consciously being passive aggressive. It's all subconscious and unconscious. So that's the level you want to hit at. You want to hit at asking questions in a way that is getting them into their prefrontal cortex and off of autopilot. That's what you're looking for. You want them off of autopilot. So instead of, again, you're being passive aggressive, which of course triggers defensiveness and denial. Instead, I tell people to describe what you observed to open a conversation, which means you have to stop being so pissed about it. So I had this the other day with someone who I was working with in a setting, and I said, hey, I noticed the deadline was missed again. This person has missed their deadline 4 or 5 times. I noticed the deadline was missed again. I want to make sure we're on the same page about what's getting in the way. I said something like that. And then I said, tell me more about your process, and they were like, well, what do you mean? I wasn't that late. I was a day. I'm like, yeah, no, I know you're right. But you were late on the other thing. You were late on the other thing. And I had specific examples. I said, all of those were late. And they at first they tried to deny it. And I said, no. I said, I could show you the emails. I sent you an email about each of these, or someone else, actually their boss had. That's who I was working with. I said, but so something's going on. Clearly, let's talk about your process. I didn't diagnose them. Don't diagnose. That's not your job. I'm allowed to diagnose and I don't diagnose. You're addressing this specific observable behavior and inviting directness. That's what you want to do. I noticed this. I'm curious. Curious is my other favorite thing. Confused is my other favorite thing. I'm confused. I felt like we agreed to this, but then you said that, or I just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. You're not going to remember Sergeant Friday, but I'm not going to get into that right now because you're too young. So anyway, just the facts. That's all you're looking for. Okay. All right. And then you're asking these exact questions, very specific, observable behaviors. You ask the question, get your bite out of it. Make sure you've regulated yourself first, taking a nice deep breath. I want to be correct, not effective. And then let's really come up with a solution. You're not trying to make them wrong or make them apologize. That's not what we're doing. We're just trying to get this done better in the future so you don't have to keep dealing with this BS, right? That's all we're trying to do. Part 2 is make the implicit explicit. That's what I say. So the second, that's the second piece. Passive aggressive behavior thrives in the space between what's said and what's meant. So your job is to close that space calmly. Okay. So when someone says fine in a tone that clearly isn't fine, again, I come back to that some version of what I just said. I'm confused. So it might be, I'm a little confused. Your tone, your language, make it pretty clear you have some reservations. So, hey, I'd like to hear them. And I will tell you a lot of the time that alone shifts the dynamic because, again, people are doing it very subconsciously and they get a little embarrassed because you've removed the deniability without attacking the person. That's what's so beautiful. And again, sometimes they'll say like, I don't know what you're talking about. I feel fine about this. And you'll say, really? Like your tone right now, this is how you sound when you're fine? Are you sure? Just take a minute. I'm just curious. It doesn't feel that way to me. And I tend to trust my gut on these things. So maybe you haven't thought about it a lot. Just take a minute. Let me know. Is it, and hear my voice. This is exactly how I do it. I do it in a very open, very curious way because I am curious. There is something, what's crazy? Sometimes the passive aggressive person actually has great feedback. They do. They're not just being an a-hole. They have great feedback sometimes, but they've gotten so used to this pattern, right? That they forget that they have great feedback. And I'm telling the truth. I have sometimes had these conversations and gotten the person to go, oh, well, yeah, I guess I'm kind of concerned about blah, 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 and how we're going to be able to get that done in my department. I'm like, oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. Let's talk about it. Tell me more. And then I don't just go into reassurance like, no, we've already thought of that. It's okay. No. Ask more questions right there, right? Right there. Well, tell me more. What are you worried about? See, I'll say, I agree first. Yeah, maybe this is something we haven't thought. I think we've covered it, but maybe we haven't. Let me hear what your thoughts are about this. Or I even sometimes give them some love. You know better than me. It's your department. You're the one who's been doing this work all this time. If it's true, I never lie. I don't make crap up to make them feel good. But if I can find something where I can give a genuine compliment that has integrity behind it, I will, sure. Or feedback or opinion or whatever that I believe is true, then I'll say it. If I think, again, that it'll help them ground themselves like, oh, I do know what I'm talking about. Give me a minute. And again, if they push back with something like, I also hear like, oh, I didn't say anything, you just stay steady. I understand you didn't say anything, but of course your tone or your attitude speaks volumes. Again, I'd like to talk this through so we're both on the same page. Just kind of like a mantra right there. Be curious. Be curious. I did an entire episode in the Relationships Made Easy podcast on being curious. I'll link to it on the episode, right? On the episode on the website and below the video on YouTube. Okay. Part 3 is to manage your nervous system. Maybe this should be part 1. I don't know. But the third is you got to manage your own nervous system response. The reason passive aggressive behavior is so damn effective is that it hooks your threat response and keeps it activated. So the antidote isn't to ignore the signal because your nervous system is right. Something is off. It's to stop letting that signal drive your behavior. And as I've mentioned many, many times, every time, your best bet for this is to be mindful. You have to be in your moments to notice it. The research shows that a consistent mindfulness practice directly reduces amygdala reactivity, the fear response, directly reduces it. I'll link to that research, which means you can observe the dynamic without being consumed by it and respond from a much more grounded place, which is how this whole thing has to go. Okay, it has to go. So again, maybe that should have been step 1, getting your head in the right place. And I think one more thing worth saying is that sometimes the right move is to stop expecting the relationship to be different than it is. Not every passive-aggressive coworker is going to become a direct communicator because you handled one conversation well. It's not going to happen. So some patterns are deeply entrenched, and the most useful thing you can do is really to adjust your expectations, limit your exposure if that's possible, and stop taking the behavior personally. I know that last piece is easier said than done, but it becomes more possible when you understand that the behavior is about that person's relationship with conflict, not their relationship with you. It's not about you. I say with love, it's not about you. I know everything feels like it's about you. It's not. So I would say that the bottom line, if I want to bottom line this, and I have a great free download for today, but the bottom line on passive aggressive coworkers is that passive aggressive behavior is indirect hostility, right? With plausible deniability. It's maddening precisely because it's designed to be. It develops, again, in environments where direct expression of negative, quote unquote, negative feelings felt unsafe. And it gets reinforced by workplace cultures that really reward agreeableness and punish dissent. That's what happens. And that 3-part approach I gave you with asking questions instead of making statements, making the implicit explicit, right? And managing your own nervous system in whichever order you do those 3 in. The reason that works, and I can tell you it works, is because it addresses a different piece of the dynamic. Each piece does. So none of them require the other person to change first. All of them shift what's available to you in the interaction. And they really work, I'm telling you right now. So let's put today's lesson into action. You know, I love you and I want to help. So if this is an issue for you, today's free download, I'm calling it the passive aggressive response guide. It's a quick, I always make them 1-page quick. It's a tool for navigating the most common passive aggressive scenarios at work with language that's direct without being inflammatory. So I try to give you some scripts, really in different situations. So, because I know how hard it is in the moment. And if you have a script at the ready, it's going to really help. All right, that's it. Thank you for spending time with me as always. I really appreciate it. You have a lot of ways you can spend your time, and I love when we do it together. So make sure you write in with any questions or topics you'd like to hear about. Season 3 is already kind of in the can, but season 4, I'll be finishing out the year for season 4, which I don't even know when that's going to start. Sometime in the late summer, probably. By the time season 3 is done and I take a break and all that. But I'd love to hear. So Abby@AbbyMetcalf.com, or you can contact me through the website, AbbyMetcalf.com. Go to the Let's Connect page. That's it. Have an amazing week, and we'll talk real soon.